privilege sort of turns that lens around. And what we hope, I hope, what I hope to get out of this series is an introspective look. What does it mean to be privileged here in Canada, here in North America? What does it mean? What does it mean for the lives around us when we talk about privilege? So we're not only going to talk about white privilege, but it's hard to talk about privilege in a nearly all-white church without talking about whiteness. And so we're doing a fair bit of that. So my apologies, I guess. Not really. Last week I told you a story. I'm going to retell it in case you missed it. Hello. I was at a conference and we were talking about inclusion and diversity and all kinds of different things, and the topic shifted from inclusion to racial reconciliation, racial injustice, and we did an exercise, and we, for better or worse, all the people of color were taken into one room, and all the white people, self-identified either way, all the white people were taken into another room, and I don't know what they did over there. I'm white. That's where we started this conversation. I'm white. Man. And so, we were asked the question, what is white culture? Privilege is not being able to answer that about yourself. And we couldn't answer that question. Privilege is assuming and expecting that you grow up watching Disney movies about heroes and heroines that look like you. Privilege is growing up looking at authority figures that look like you, in a large part. Privilege is not being able to answer the question, what does it mean to be white? You see, when we ask that question, we quickly recognize, we quickly recognize that what occurs in that question is that all race in our North American context is defined by whiteness as the norm, as the status quo. And so if you are not white, then you are defined against the white backdrop. If you are white, you don't have to define anything. That's privilege. It's sometimes overt and sometimes very subtle. And this is where we in Canada don't get to escape it. We don't get to escape this. We think we do. And we're going to get more specific next week when we turn toward Canada specifically, and BC specifically. But we think we get to escape it. But we get to watch the same, for the most part, aside from the required Canada-produced television. We get to watch mostly the same North American TV that comes out of the U.S. or movies and that sort of thing. And we see from very early on that the lightness of your skin matters. One example that I came across was Aladdin. I've actually been trying to find Aladdin because my kids haven't seen it, and it was one of my favorite movies. Aladdin is great. But even in Aladdin, the character Aladdin is very light in a Middle Eastern society or setting. Aladdin is very light. Our hero of the story Jafar is pretty dark. You get subtleties throughout messaging and entertainment and news, and everywhere you look, you get these subtleties that light is good and dark is bad. And it goes. How do you put this? It is not just North American. I had a professor during my master's program that was from Haiti, and he explained to us the class system in Haiti. And it, just like in North America, goes from light to dark in terms of your status and your class and how included you are in society. And they have terms. This is insane. They have terms for a white mother and a black father, or a black mother and a white father, and all the way down the line. If you have a grandparent or all of that down the line is defined by how light or how dark you are. There's a woman doing a TEDx talking about an experience she had. She was she was trying out for a part in a movie just recently, last couple of years. It was a mostly black cast, which is rare for the film industry. And so she was excited, and she saw a casting call, and she thought, well, maybe I'll go look. And she begins reading the descriptions of people that they're looking for. And there's A girls and B girls and C girls. And she's reading the description of what A girls are in this predominantly black casted film. Lighter skinned, flowing hair, and it goes on to essentially describe what we expect to find in a beauty magazine that is white minus a little darker skin. B-class girls, which includes the Beyonce type, are a bit curvier, a bit darker, still long flowing hair, real, and on it goes. And this beautiful woman standing on the stage begins to define herself as, and then it came to the C girls. That's where I would have tried out for. Dark skin. And that's where she needed to stop. Even in a fully black casted film in 21st century, we're defining good and bad in layers of color. We thought we were past this. If you're white, you don't think about these things. If you're white, you open up a children's Bible that depicts God in whiteness. If you are white, you grow up looking at police officers, authority figures, principals, most of your teachers, and on and on and on, that look like you. That is the subtlety of privilege. And if you're white, we don't necessarily see it. Tracy Blackman tells a story about being, she was reading before she started kindergarten. By grade 3, she was acting as a student aide for the other kids in her class, so that to help them learn how to read and to help them with different things. And she's a teacher's pet. And by grade 4, they were suggesting to her parents that they move her to an academically focused school across town on the other side of town. And so she goes to this prep school, starting in grade 4. She walks into a classroom, has no one else that looks like her in her classroom, and does not see another person in her classroom again that looks like her until university. She excels in school, has done everything exceptionally well, has been involved in extracurriculars, has done all kinds of stuff. And because of the nature of this school, that many of the kids from this school go to elite universities, they have recruiters come and tell them and try to get them to apply to their schools. And Harvard comes one day. She was a junior in high school. Is that what you call it here? No? Something like third year, grade 11. Grade 11. We got it. Sometimes I still have a hard time converting things. Grade 11. A recruiter comes from Harvard, talks to their class, tells them that every year they have enough 4.0 again. Does that work? Okay, thank you. Oh, goodness. Enough 4.0 students to fill their entire freshman first year class. This is more difficult than I expected. And so to be accepted to Harvard, you can't just have great grades. You have to have the grades. You have to have extracurriculars. You have to be involved in different cultural things or events or other languages. You have to stand out. Tracy was excited to speak to the Harvard recruit after the presentation. Before she could tell her story and about the languages that she had been working on and the cultural events that she had been doing and the different things that she had been planning and all of her different extracurriculars, leads in plays and things like that, he intercedes and tells her, if you just have a 2.5 grade point average, you can go to Harvard. She didn't need that. She didn't want to hear that. She didn't care because she had done the work and had done the extracurriculars and was an exceptional student and member of her community, and is told none of that matters. And was assumed by the recruiter that she wasn't going to have the GPA to do it. Privilege is living without those assumptions placed on you. Privilege is not being asked that question. I want to tell one more story on education, but I want to come back first, because in that mix of stories, we mentioned children's Bibles. Everywhere you go, and we're just going to call him White Jesus for a few minutes. Everywhere you go, you see depictions of God, not here, but in children's books, in children's Bibles that are illustrated, in churches, on TV, in the film industry, like everywhere you look, when we depict Jesus, almost exclusively, he's depicted as white. Now, that may not seem like that big of a deal. He has to be depicted somehow that's another question. If you're going to put him on TV, he has to be depicted somehow. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but most assuredly, Jesus was not white, right? We can do that. He's a Middle Eastern border with Africa, like Jewish man, not white for sure, whatever he looked like. Yet, in all of those places, if you, and this is again a subtlety, but you grow up learning about Jesus and then seeing depictions of Jesus and seeing drawings of Jesus and seeing characters play Jesus on TV and in the movies and play Moses and play Noah as white people all along. Now, the opening lines of the Bible tell this beautiful story of God creating. And this beautiful line that we've actually done a few times over the last year, this beautiful line, and in the image of God, he created them. We tell ourselves, we read in our text that in the image of God we have been created, and yet when we put out an image of God, if you've grown up as a person of color, we put out an image of God that never, ever looks like you. You are created in the image of God, but we are not going to create an image of God that looks like you. That's very subtle, but it's very real if you grow up in a predominantly white community and then you see stories and everything revolves around shades of color from light to dark. And then we constantly depict Jesus as white or very, very light. That is ingrained in you. This is privilege. This is the story of privilege. What I hope for us to do with this series, let me find my thing here. It's lost. What I hope for us to do with this series is begin to see what's underneath the surface. Last week, I asked you, I'm curious if anyone tried to look through their whole week through the lens of race. You don't have to raise your hand. If we can begin to see the subtleties and the structures underneath our communities and our culture and our society that play into this story of privilege, I think we can begin to be asking ourselves, well, what is our role in this? Not in a guilt kind of way. I don't want to go in that direction. White guilt, is that a phrase we know? We don't need to do that. What we do need to do is think about how we live and how we think and talk about race, how we treat people of different races, how we interact with our communities. Those are important things. And God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And so God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. This is pivotal in how we think about our world. Being created in the image of God has been interpreted 1,000 different ways and in 1,000 different directions. And most pointedly, we recognize God working through people around us. A lot of you have been hurt by church or by people in churches. And we often ask you, you are the voice. And unfortunately, there's no way around this. As you go out from here, you are the voice that people understand. As a Christian, as a person in a church, people learn about God through you. If you look at someone and treat someone as if they have the image of God in them, the world changes. You change. The responses are different. The culture shifts just ever so slightly with each interaction. Our purpose in this story is just to begin to think through these things. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? One more story, maybe a couple. Does anyone, well, I know some of you listen to Revisionist History, Malcolm Gladwell. Very interesting. You should start. It's a podcast, and he takes a story out of history and then reframes it or talks about it in a different light. So if you grow up if you grow up in our community, if you are First Nations, if you are from a different country, if you are a visible minority, if you're a person of color, you grow up in a school system that has teachers that mostly don't look like you. It's not 100%, but I can count on one hand the number of teachers at my kids' school that aren't white. There's a famous case in the U.S., Brown versus Board of Education. The black community went, here's how this goes. There's a lawsuit attempting to integrate schools and say that we should not be separated. What's interesting is how the case was interpreted by the Supreme Court. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And we often think about this story as a story of black kids should have access to the same schools and resources that white kids have access to. That's the story. But there's a subtlety in that statement that is missed. It is a should have access to. It is a access to diversity, is access to integrated schooling. But what occurs when the Supreme Court lays down their decision is that, which was never argued in the case, is that black students should have the same access to quality education. And you hear somebody talk about the case that was there, or the integration story of white schools and black schools. There was never a problem with the education in the black schools. It wasn't about bad teachers. It wasn't about level of access and being able to learn. their teachers were good. Their teachers taught well. Their teachers were educated. They knew what they were doing. It wasn't a good versus bad education system. It was a question of integration. It was a question of should one have a choice in their education? Should one be able to access a different school if desired? And when the Supreme Court gave down their decision, the statement was that black students should have the same access to quality education, as in they weren't getting a quality education before, and we're going to make it so that they do get a quality education. Do you hear the shift in what's happening there? And so when they forced the integration of schools, which, not to say that that's a bad thing, what occurred was fewer teachers needed jobs. Students were forced to take on the role of the hero and heroine. Students were taken from black schools and put at the center of attention in a white school. And when they integrated the systems, guess which teachers they kept on board in that process? You don't have to say it out loud. In almost every district that went through this process, nearly every black teacher was let go. And so in one fell swoop, the education system went from teachers that look like me and authority figures that look like me to teachers that don't, teachers that didn't want to do this to begin with, teachers that assume I need to strive for a 2.5 GPA and not a 4.0 GPA. The subtleties in these stories that get missed, the subtleties in the way that life gets lived out is what is important in this conversation. I know that I can walk through a store, I can pick things up, I can take them out of their packages, I can put them back in or not and just set them on the shelf. I wouldn't do that. But I know that I can walk through and live my life without being observed and extra special attention given to and followed around stores. And I can tell you twice, when I was a teenager, I was followed around a store. Maybe I didn't notice it other times. 20 years ago, I was followed around a store, and guess what? It impacted me. It impacted how I thought about myself, what people thought about me, and I still remember it. Some 15 years ago, I was in a cafeteria. I don't eat meat. I got a salad in the cafeteria and go to pay, and the woman assumes that there is some sort of chicken or something underneath my salad that I'm trying to sneak out. Once in my life, I went back to that cafeteria a few months ago, and I recalled that one time. Out of thousands of times walking through that cafeteria, I remember that one. Privilege is being able to tell that singular story and not live it every day. And there are subtleties that we miss. If we are created in the image of God, and if we believe that humanity in all of its beautiful colors and diversity of all sorts is created in the image of God, then it is in that diversity that we recognize the image of God. Not in a singular or in a particular, but it is in the diversity.